called a meeting of the Security Council to discuss with other countries the rights violations by the State of Israel against the Palestinians. Welcome to our new sketch comedy show here at the Ayn Rand Center UK. No, unfortunately, that's not what this is. This actually happened. Yes, a military dictatorship that makes protesters disappear and that has been in power for 60 years or so. Called a secure United Nations Security Council meeting. The council that's supposed to keep the world safe and everything, to talk about Israel bombing a school. Now, we already know, and we're going to get into this, what the school was. This was not a school. Nobody was in class. Nobody was teaching anything except maybe it was similar to what it is as a school, in that I'm sure people were being told how good it is to murder Jews, which is what you learn in schools in Gaza. But yeah, many terrorists were hiding there. 31, I believe, is the latest number of known wanted terrorists who are confirmed dead in that strike. But no, the headlines said Israel bombs a school, and as headlines go, so politicians and leaders follow. Yeah, I know it sounds like a contradiction in terms, but that is the world of politics. And yeah, one by one, countries in the Security Council meeting talk about how horrible this is, the tragic loss of life, and so on. And of course, blame Israel for it, even though there was some acknowledgement by at least a UN official who read at the start what is going on, that Hamas uses facilities where people hide, or where people take shelter, uses that to hide their terrorists. But then they say, of course, that does not justify Israel doing anything to kill the terrorists, knowing that if those terrorists are alive, they will likely kill Israelis. The bottom line is, if terrorists hide behind so-called civilians in Gaza, Israelis deserve to die. That is the only conclusion you can come to from this. But again, look at who's discussing it in the UN Security Council. Welcome to the reality show. Yeah, it is still a commentary channel on current events, and yeah, we're gonna try to decipher this, probably unsuccessfully, because look, this is a thing, and it's going to continue to be a thing. And yeah, the most we can do, which we'll keep doing, is point it out. I'm joined by Kirk, Marco, Richard. Marco, your thoughts on this latest Security Council meeting, or the Security Council in general?
Well, yeah, I mean, about the schools of continuing the comical theme here, it's a bit like a Roadrunner sketch, isn't it? You just put a big sign saying school, and then you can do whatever stuff you want underneath it, and you can't hit it because it says schools. But just again, if you want to hear something funny, just go to the Security Council website and look at the first statement that they make. The Security Council has primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. China and Russia. Russia is the aggressive state which has just invaded Ukraine. Is one of the people with a veto on it. So that statement itself disqualifies the whole organization from being taken seriously. And to be honest, why should you take it seriously? I mean, just look what it's made up. And as we discussed today, we'll see how ridiculous this whole farce is, really.
Let me start with just a few comments on the Algeria meeting about Israel that they called. Because there was a couple of quotes I just wanted to read out right at the top of this, which is from Ammar Benjama, who's the Algerian permanent representative to the UN Security Council. He said these two things. He said, "For 311 days, our council has been ignored. while an entire people is being subjected to collective punishment. And he also said it wouldn't have been possible without, quote, generous financial and military assistance freely provided to the Israeli aggressor. That's what you get from Algeria when it comes to their appearance on it. And what do they want? They want sanctions against Israel. They want to criticize them for ignoring previous decisions. They want them. They're angry that they obstructed ceasefire resolutions in the past. Basically, they just want them to capitulate to the kind of things that they enforce, regularly on their own people, using force to make sure that freedom is suppressed.
Sure.
Yeah, I think all these stories that we're talking about is just further proof that at best, the best thing you could say about the United Nations is that it is a useless organization, considering that it was founded, I think, in 1945, 1940s, following World War II. And one of its big missions was to maintain peace and prevent war. And didn't take so long for it to fail at that mission. But even worse, it's been used by the world's loons, goons, and buffoons, authoritarians, dictatorships. The title of this show is Where Dictatorships Lecture Democracies. It's been used as an instrument for that. It's been used as a means for dictatorships to launder their reputation and further their agenda. Back in 2018, Ted Pichoni of the Brookings Institute put out a whole paper talking about China's law. It's titled China's Long Game on the Human Rights at the United Nations. And it talks about how China has a history of trying to bribe other member countries to go along with their efforts to block like human rights condemnations and other stuff. And yeah, to Marco's point, mentions that Russia is one of the 5 veto members of the Security Council. I mean, it wasn't always Russia. It used to be the Soviet Union, who I don't know what the bettered world leaders were thinking, like Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, after seeing how World War II started, after seeing how diplomacy failed with Nazi Germany. Not only that, the Soviet Union, already one of the world's bloodiest dictatorships, with what Stalin was doing with his purges, with its dekulakization campaigns, with its famines and Holodomor, and on top of that, they helped Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany start World War II with their non-aggression pact. And then after all of that, I guess the United States and the United Kingdom and France decided, oh yeah, the Stalin guy, maybe we can work with him after all the horrible things he has done and his efforts to help start this war that we're trying to bring to an end. And yeah, you're just seeing more of the same of that today. What's the worst that could happen when you invite the arguably the bloodiest dictator in the world, than Joseph Stalin, to have a seat at the Security Council at this new prestigious institution called the United Nations?
Yeah, I mean, we often say on this channel the last time any Western country fought a war properly was World War II. And right after World War II, there were voices saying, look, the Soviet Union is a big threat, and maybe we should remove that threat now when they don't have nukes, rather than later when they do have nukes. And of course, after World War II, it's understandable that people weren't too eager to continue having war. But we paid for the fact that that wasn't done, and we're in a way still paying for it, because Russia would not be the evil empire that it is at the moment. Who knows if any of these other communist dictatorships would exist? North Korea, China, Cuba, and various on and off communist dictatorships in South America. What would their status be today had they not had Russia backing them and basically encouraging those countries to go communist? And what would the Middle East look like without Russian support for every evil country there? So yeah, so we reward Russia with a permanent seat. We reward China because they're a threat with a permanent seat and veto power, which means nothing can actually go through that would promote world peace, because you remove those 2 threats and you've taken most of the journey towards world peace. The only times you have resolutions actually going through is on those times that the U.S. doesn't exercise its veto power when there's a resolution against Israel, which happens rarely, but does happen and has happened, I believe, once since October 7th. So yeah, and I want to address something also about the title and in the context of Michael's comment here. Every member of the UN is a rights-violating government with zero legitimacy. Well, no, not every member is has zero legitimacy. Yes, governments, unfortunately, in free countries as well, violate rights. And I chose the word democracies in the title because it's both true and kind of worked better as a title, but this was not an advocacy of democracy. I would love to see countries that are free, regardless of whether or not the majority would vote away those freedoms. But yeah, the countries being lectured for whatever whatever negatives there are about them are infinitely better, without a doubt, than the countries that are doing the lecturing. Algeria is not in a position to lecture Israel about anything ever because it's not a legitimate government. It has no legitimacy as a state, and any more than a gangster on the street negotiating to what extent you're allowed to live your life the way you want to if some other gangster doesn't want you to live your life at all. So yeah, yeah. Look, saying there are things to improve in the U.S. and in Israel and in Europe is all nice and true, but it doesn't mean that there is no fundamental difference between semi-free countries and totalitarian regimes. And unfortunately, what you're saying, Michael, is kind of what the international community, so-called, and especially Western countries are saying in their actions in allowing these, in allowing the UN as a body and allowing different bodies in the UN, like the Security Council, like random, from time to time, you hear the Human Rights Commission headed by Saudi Arabia, or the Women's Rights Commission headed by some country where, women don't have the right to vote and are considered the property of their husbands legally. So yeah, there are differences, and we should point them out, and encourage the West to be better, in part by not treating these savages as if they're legitimate. Marco.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that most of the countries in the UN are either illegitimate or failed states, and the fact that the westernized, civilized countries are still in the UN effectively provide a thin layer, a thin veneer of credibility to all the rest of the world, to all the rest of the states that actually would be better if they weren't there at all. I mean, if they didn't exist. And the sole problem is that we allow, as in the West, to the UN to have this kind of clout, and we also undermine its whole function. The whole point of the UN was to this laughable security and protection. We allow that function to be totally destroyed when you allow Soviet Russia in, and when you allow Mao's China to stay on the council. They should have been kicked out the moment they turned commies. I mean, that's not a difficult thing to do. They were effectively on their knees, so you could have just flattened them if you wanted to at that point. But no, we decided to appease the tin pot countries held up by a couple of dictators, and just look at what's happening now. For example, the rotation. You mentioned earlier on, things like the Human Rights Commission, which was headed by Iran a few months ago. So, Iran is not famously a liberal state, is it? But the Security Council itself is made by the five fixed members with a veto, and an additional 10 countries, which was chosen with a regional association, effectively. 3 countries from Africa, two from Eastern Europe, I think, and
one from Eastern Europe.
one from Eastern Europe, and some others. And all the states take a rotation every month. 12 of the 15 will chair the meeting for the council. Again, it's just to give each of these failed states a sort of credibility, so they can present themselves. Oh, we are the chair of the Security Council of the UN, so what we say has to be listened to. And of course, currently it's what's that called? Sierra Leone is the president, as the president is right now. And they're asking for more seats for Africa. They're asking for more representation from African countries. They would like to expand this council just to include more weight from Africa. And one of the statements that they made, which is quite laughable, this episode is turning up to be a blast, really. Haha, so funny. Effectively, they're saying that we cannot accept that the world's preeminent peace and security body, arguable, lacks a permanent voice for a continent of well over 1 billion people. Yeah, okay, good point. Nor can we accept that Africa's views are undervalued or questioned on peace and security. Now, the continent they're talking about, fair enough, there are over 1 billion people in it, but Cameroon, Chad, Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Burkina Faso, jihad uprising going on there. Niger, there's a coup. Nigeria, Boko Haram, is Islamist thing. Most of the states in Africa are actually either currently going through civil wars, or just take, for example, the Sahel or the northwestern Africa, the Maghreb. Yeah, they are effectively undergoing constant changes in terms of civil wars and coups and all this kind of stuff. And some of them are actually quite significant, like Boko Haram in Nigeria and the Burkina Faso jihad taking place there could actually spell a significant loss of life. Just look at South Sudan, for example. Sudan and South Sudan, that's a total mess. But we are to believe that including more these fine people in the UN is actually going to make life better. Well,
and on that point from Sierra Leone about expanding the African representation, I mean, Antonio Gutierrez, who we all know only too well, has spoken out on that and has said the current underrepresentation of Africa offends the principles of equity and inclusion, which, of course, one of the threads that runs through all of these big organizations, isn't it? Trying to make the unequal equal. So one of the things I wanted to mention about Algeria, when I've referred to it earlier, particularly since they were the ones particularly pressing for this Israeli punishment, was, of course, that their own population has between 97 and 99% Muslim. Do you think that was a factor at all in how they choose to grandstand on the big stage? I suspect so. When it comes to how the UN is set up at the moment, of course, you have the UN General Assembly, based in New York City. Obviously, gives it the kudos of being based in New York City, with all 193 representatives from across the world on it. And those are the ones that vote for the non-permanent members, who are elected like every 2 years, half of them each time. And they need at least 2/3 for each seat majority for each seat that they go for. But all of that links together, makes it all look so official. You can't stand again if you've just been on it as a non-permanent member. So that means you're always shuffling around between the seats between the regions. And of course, there's a bit of horse trading because it's only for 2 years as to who's going to get the votes for one session and who's going to get the votes 2 years later. And as it's split at the moment, those 10 members have like 3 African, 2 Asia Pacific, 2 Latin American, Caribbean, 2 Western Europe, and 1 Eastern Europe. And of course, some of the countries involved, which I can go through in a minute, are of completely dubious inclusion. I'll just mention Mozambique as one of them. I mean, they've got a lot of Islamist insurgencies at the moment. A couple of years ago, the Islamist insurgencies took over an entire city of 75,000 people and an island, and they caused massive displacement, and they left a load of adults and beheaded as they swarm through the city, which sounds horribly familiar.
Sure.
I'm sorry. The only thing that really I can think about right now is this whole business of back in 1971, the United Nations decided to replace the Republic of China, which is known today as Taiwan, which at the time, in all fairness, if I don't know the exact time period of the history of Taiwan, but I'm pretty sure at that point it was still kind of a military dictatorship, and it didn't really start to reform into more of a free or democratic country until the 80s or 90s. I might be mistaken on those details, but all that considered, 1971, this was after what? Mao Zedong tried the Great Leap Forward, which resulted in the deaths of millions of people, the Cultural Revolution, which recently was depicted in that new, I think it's called the Three Body Problem. Everyone was talking about that opening scene, that terrifying opening scene from the Cultural Revolution, which has also been depicted in movies like The Last Emperor. But imagine if that's what you need to do to earn a seat on the Security Council. It's like, okay, after all of that blood and horror that Chairman Mao Zedong inflicted on his people, now we're going to invite him to the United Nations and give him a seat at the Security Council with veto power, and then tell the Republic of China to, get lost, and we never want to hear from you again, even if you reform yourself into a better, freer, more democratic country. No, no, Taiwan, no, 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 no. This communist dictatorship over here, which is still responsible for human rights violations, which you probably don't know as much about as you otherwise would because they have such a huge influence at the United Nations. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I saw a tweet going around asking, why does communism not have the same why is it not treated with as much disdain as, say, Nazi Germany and that brand of dictatorship? And I think you could probably blame the United Nations for that. This is an institution, again, that was established by the victors of World War II. And we took a brutal dictatorship like Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union and put it on equal moral footing and legitimacy with France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And what does that say? Just kind of equal. We're all good countries. Just have a little bit of disagreement. I don't know. I wonder. I can't help but wonder if that's a reason why people don't really think of communism with as much disdain and horror as say the Nazis. But anyways, that's all that's on my mind at the moment. Even if I'm kind of pivoting away from talking about Algeria and all the other common threads, common stories going on with the United Nations at the moment.
Yeah,
Well,
and
there's,
so
yeah.
sorry. And of course, here in the West, we're quite happy to have people hanging pictures of Mao or going around with T-shirt with Che Guevara. I mean, imagine doing that with Hitler. I mean, they are as evil as each other. Mao killed, between 20 and 40 million of his own people. But hey, it's lefty, it's art, it's communist, so it's good.
Um, so a few comments in the chat. Tenebra says Russia plus China, not good for US and Europe. We should try to ally with one. Unfortunately, the better ally would be Russia. I mean, that in one sentence is basically all of the errors that the West has made in foreign policy since very very long for a very long time. No, you don't look at places where everybody's evil and then say, let's look at whoever is maybe slightly less evil or slightly less of a threat and pretend like they're our best friends. That has only caused war. It has only caused small organizations that seemingly weren't major threats become major threats by our support. We should never support evil anywhere. So no, and look, what would help against Russia and China is showing strength. It doesn't mean nuking both countries. It means showing strength where they are showing that they are a threat, and showing strength in other places where maybe they're involved in some way, but not a direct threat, like in the Middle East, where certainly Russia is behind a lot of the problems, and just showing that the West will stand up to its enemies and is willing to fight and defeat those enemies where whatever the cost, certainly whatever the cost to the enemy, because that sends a message to Russia and China that maybe fighting against the West is not a good idea. So in the context, Marco, you brought up, was it Mozambique that said Africa needs more representation?
Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone.
So in that context, Jesse said, I think Mauritania still has a form of slavery. Yeah, there are countries with slavery. There are countries with all sorts of really bad policies. But if you're saying, everybody needs a voice, which is kind of the idea, everybody deserves an equal voice. So yeah, you in the West are free to say slavery is not for us, but don't tell us that it's not okay. It's not okay in our countries. Don't tell us that women are people. You treat women as people, and we'll treat them as property, and so on and so forth. We can get into pretty much everything. Yeah, it is multiculturalism applied to international relations. It's the idea that you can't judge people where you absolutely should. This is all what moral judgment is about, and then you decide if the other side is worthy of dealing with. And of course, you should decide if they have slavery or if they support terrorism, if they're a military dictatorship, they're not worth dealing with. And you don't ask them what they think will bring world peace. You say, okay, become a free country, and then we can talk. El Rito says best parents are benevolent dictators, worst parents libertarians, I would dare say. I mean, look, context matters, and the government has a different role from parents, and so using a word like dictator, which applies to a leader of a country, and I don't think that applies to parenting. If a parent is the decision maker, they could be benevolent or they could be malevolent. I don't think dictator in any case applies. But yeah, things like that, parenting certainly, or so I hear, is not an easy, straightforward thing. As are many things that people go through in life beyond just looking at the latest developments in culture and politics. And one of the great voices in psychology. Objectivists in our audience will know her, and longtime viewers of this channel will know her. Dr. Ellen Kenner. This episode is sponsored by Dr. Ellen Kenner's radio show, which you can find out more about in the link we'll post in the chat and in this video ad.
The Dr. Ellen Kenner podcast.
Like he can get real angry with the kids, but it's an out of context emotion. He's angry at something and he's taking it out on you or the kids. So the next question is, do you want to stay with him for life?
I do, but not if he's going to be like this.
Well, then you need to let him know that.
The Dr. Ellen Kenner podcast is 10 minutes of advice to callers on romance, parenting, family, and friendship conflicts. At drkenner.com, you can choose podcasts on dozens of topics and hear Dr. Kenner solve her callers' personal difficulties.
You need to be firm. You don't need to be, if you're wimpy, people who are angry, who learn how to manipulate others, look for their sources of vulnerability. So if he sees you hedging, he will use whatever insecurities you have.
Visit drkenner.com and go to the radio podcast section. That's drkenner.com, drkenner.com.
And yeah, that link is in the chat and in the description. Michael, who I have my disagreements with, says something I agree with. Dr. Kenner is my hero. I've read that book 3 times. That book, I'm assuming, The Selfish Case for Romance. Did I get that title right? Wrong. Richard, I'm looking at you to tell me, but yeah, I think I got it right. If not, the audience will correct me. Yeah, so the link is in the chat and in the description. We obviously recommend Dr. Kenner, who has been on this channel many times, was, I think, on every episode of The Psychology of the Selfish Path to Romance. That does make more sense. Thank you, Daniel. Was on every episode of The Psychology of the Fountainhead Characters and The Psychology of Atlas Shrugged Characters. So yeah, check out Dr. Kenner. Thank you, Gigi Ryder, for the super chat. Gigi Ryder says communists and USSR were always anti-Nazi, except when they were pro-Nazi for a few years in the 1930s. Yes, and of course, what made them anti-Nazi is the fact that the Nazis decided to turn on them. Otherwise, yeah, they would still be on the same page. Marco.
Yeah, I mean that clip. If you're wimpy, he'll turn on you. That's exactly what we're doing in the West. We're being wimpy, and every single dictator or failed state is turning against us, and we're seeing on daily basis, don't we? But yeah, unfortunately, the mistakes we made 8 years ago. I mean, 8 years ago is a long time, but it's also not that long. It's less than a span of a human life nowadays. And 8 years ago, after the war, we made the mistake of seeing Russia, Soviet Russia, as an ally. Turned out that during the conference in Yalta in I think April 45, before the actually death of Hitler, before the end of the war, when the war was nearly finished, but not quite. Stalin was actually bugging every single delegation. So he was always a step ahead of the West, who kept believing in, trusting it as a trustworthy ally. And of course, we should have really dropped a third nuclear bomb on top of the Kremlin, like Patton would have probably pushed for. But unfortunately, people like him weren't listened to, and they decided to go for appeasement. And we still appease people like that. We still appease China. We just still appease the Palestinians. We appease every single. You find a bad dictator, a bad country, and we're gonna find an excuse for them to do whatever they do best, which is destroying human lives.
I think what the problem here with the UN is exactly what you were describing, Razi. The fact it sets up countries to be supposedly equal. Antonio Gutierrez refers to this as the principle of sovereign equality of states. That's the official term for it. And you can start to see constantly how concepts and terms end up being abused, because you need only look at the quote from Sierra Leone that described extending the veto capability to Africa as well as being simply a matter of justice. Really. The problem, of course, with that is that in order to change the UN Charter, you actually need all 5 members of the Permanent Council to agree, and none of them can abstain when it comes to changing the UN Charter. Although they can abstain on all other issues, if you actually want to change the Charter, you've got to vote for it. And of course, that's not going to happen. And of course, neither is China or Russia going to vote to allow themselves to be, in favor of allowing themselves to be shoved off of this organization or demoted to a non-veto country. So that's why it continues to exist in the form that it does, with Russia and China having so much, stupid clout, and therefore, of course, so much influence on so many other countries across the world. Because I noticed that initially, when the whole thing was first set up, the Soviet Union used to veto all the time, particularly when it came to adding new members to the whole, who could join the UN. And of course, as time goes on, they've begun to veto less, simply because they don't need to, because they have so much influence on so many other countries in the world that they're actually doing their bidding anyway. And because of Russia's influence across the world and China's use of its own, particularly in Africa, for manipulating African countries in order to, with investment and, of course, forced taking of loans, which they then use to wield power over countries when it comes to building ports for them, and then forcing the countries to default on their loans because they knew they couldn't possibly meet them anyway. So all of those things are used as techniques for wielding power over different countries and not needing necessarily to use the veto as much. And of course, that leaves, Just the UK, less so. They normally abstain most of the time, like the wet lettuces that we are, or often the US, who do use the veto sometimes, and particularly in Israeli matters, when countries such as the People's Republic of Algeria, which give them their People's Democratic Republic of Algeria, to give them their full name. We know what a democratic republic means. Are trying to crush countries like Israel.
Don't talk about wet lettuces. Also, all lettuce is wet. Lettuce is basically water. Kirk.
Yeah, I think you guys are right when you talk about how a big problem with a big problem with like organizations in just the world today is that a lot of the better countries, especially like the United States and countries in Europe, just lack any moral confidence and are just rather weak, and I think are willing to go along with a lot of the shenanigans, at least in a performative sense, I guess, with the United Nations. I think one example of this is a few years ago. I remember reading this long piece on Bloomberg Business Week about Guyana, who, over the last few years discovered oil. And this article talks about how ironic it is. There's a lot of irony to this because Guyana for years had gotten praised, especially by the United Nations, for their efforts toward environmentalism and, trying to save the planet from climate change. But then when they discover oil and how much money can make the country and how it can raise the standard of living for the people in the country, Guyana is like, yeah, we're not just gonna, sacrifice so we can feel good about saving the planet. No, people here want to get rich. We're not a rich country, and we're not gonna let the rest of the world tell us how much money we're allowed to make to their credit. And what's the UN doing about it? I haven't seen the UN wagging their fingers at Guyana for putting too much CO2 in the atmosphere or destroying the planet or whatever, which is one of the other big crusades that the United Nations has been on for a while at this point.
And one comment on Guyana, just quickly, is that they have a small population. They've got about 750,000 people. So this argument that Africa needs more representation because it's got over 1 billion people, but Guyana gets a seat with 750,000. There's no consistency in any of these arguments, is there?
All right, Richard, you opened a can of worms there with the lettuce. Of course, worms like lettuce, and that's I think that's the only nutritional value of lettuce is the worms that are in it, some protein. But Jason Adams says, careful with lettuce. Only lettuce I'll touch is on a Big Mac or Taco Bell, made and eaten fresh, as fresh as possible. You can ask them for a plain burger or at least to take off the lettuce, and they'll do that even at McDonald's. All right, back to the topic. So, we talk about the UN quite a bit, and the best organization talking about the UN is UN Watch. We have a clip. This is from a few years ago, but of course, nothing changes with the UN. It's always dictatorships lecturing free countries on why they are, violating rights and so on. And this is a clip where Hillel Neuer, the head of UN Watch, was talking about Arab countries accusing Israel of apartheid. This was his response.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel's 1.5 million Arabs, whatever challenges they face, enjoy full rights to vote and to be elected in the Knesset. They work as doctors and lawyers. They serve on the Supreme Court. Now, I'd like to ask the members of that commission that commissioned that report, the Arab states from which we just heard, Egypt, Iraq, and the others, how many Jews live in your countries? How many Jews lived in Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco? Once upon a time, the Middle East was full of Jews. Algeria had 140,000 Jews. Algeria, where are your Jews? Egypt used to have 75,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Syria, you had tens of thousands of Jews. Where are your Jews? Iraq, you had over 135,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Mr. President, where is the real apartheid? Why is there a UN commission on the Middle East that does not include Israel? From the 1960s and the 70s, they refused to include Israel. Where is the apartheid, Mr. President? Mr. President, why are we meeting today on an agenda item singling out only one state, the Jewish state, for targeting. Where is the apartheid, Mr. President?
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I have nothing to add to that. Thank you, Jason, for the super chat. Yeah, so one thing we hear a lot of in the media, in the news media, where we're supposedly being told what is going on, and of course in the more commentary side of the media, is we get to hear from experts on different topics. And when it comes to international relations, very, very often, these experts are from the UN, some UN body, some UN adjacent, but very, very close to the UN body. And, those people are brought on as experts. People, if you look at the UN and the higher up you look, you'd expect them to be more sort of diplomatic, as they say, in that they will try to watch the crap that comes out of their mouth. The Secretary General, as high up as you can go, Gutierrez, said days after October 7th, this didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened after decades of occupation, basically saying, look, it is the fault of Israel that Israelis were slaughtered. Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur on the Middle East, a person dealing with this conflict. And remember, the UN, as Kirk mentioned, the UN is set up to promote world peace. The person dealing with the Middle East part of that, ensuring peace everywhere, tweeted after Netanyahu, basically compared on Twitter Netanyahu after his U.S. his speech to the Congress in the U.S. compared him to Hitler. And this is somebody who a week after October 7th also said that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza in its aerial attacks before there was any ground operation. So the power of the UN is given to it essentially by the different levels of how ideas are delivered to us and ideas about current events and culture are delivered to us through media, through politicians who say, look, the UN said this, therefore this is what we should do in our country. Yeah, again, this is why we say this about almost every scumbag we talk about on this channel. We shouldn't talk about them just in terms of the content of what they're saying. They should be, if they were saying this somewhere, under a bridge or in a street corner where they probably would be in a rational society, we wouldn't be doing shows about them. But they are decision makers. They make decisions that impact all of us and impact all of us in a negative way. And they influence others who make decisions about our lives that impact us in a negative way. Marco.
Yeah, I've never seen the video before. I thought it was quite rude to confront these unaccountable bureaucrats with the truth. I mean, what the hell? Since when? Of course, if you want the answer is being provided by you right now. Soon, we're going to get rid of the Jews from Israel as well. So, that's the answer to the question. Where are the Jews? Well, give the UN a bit more time, and there's not going to be any Jew left.
I think in the UN, you've heard all sorts of people speaking lately, particularly at this meeting raised by Algeria, including the Palestine envoy to the UN, which is a thing, shouldn't necessarily be, but it is, who was, of course, referring to the 75th anniversary of the Geneva Convention in his arguments and using that as arguments. Whereas, does Hamas follow the Geneva Convention? Was the 7th of October any demonstration of the Palestinian people themselves following the Geneva Convention? Clearly not. I think when it comes to the school incident that they've also been talking about in the UN, I came across this woman, Lisa Doughton, the Director of Partnerships at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, who said that this was far from an isolated incident. I realize her job title was longer than the quote there, but far from an isolated incident, she said. I wish it was far from an isolated incident that you bomb terrorists and annihilate them, because that's the only way to win this war. That's the only way to end this war as well. But of course, she's referring to the word school, and dropping any reference to the fact that they're terrorists within there, that they're Hamas operatives who've been identified and named, and the photographs been provided. 31 of them, as you mentioned earlier, who the IDF have identified were using that school as a base, the mosque within that school.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much of the compromising, how much of this is ultimately a result of some form of pragmatism when you think about the United Nations. And it's like, yeah, maybe a more charitable way to think of things like, yeah, do we like that the Soviet Union and Communist China are Security Council members with veto power? No, but what can you do? They're both power players. They both have a lot of influence over the world. They both rule large, populated countries. So maybe it's best, they're not perfect, but maybe we can work with them to, achieve world peace and prevent war. Wouldn't it be better to be diplomatic? And how much that mentality maybe trickles down when you see what's going on in Gaza today and all of these stories for months and months about UN workers getting fired because of ties to Hamas, and them discovering Hamas headquarters and operations underneath or within UN buildings, and how much that just trickles down to maybe there are people who maybe have good intentions. Maybe they go to Gaza thinking, oh, I just want to, ensure humanitarian aid gets to people who need it. And do I like that I might have to work with people who might have ties to Hamas or might be members to Hamas? No, but maybe the ends justify the means. Do I want to work with Hamas or people associated with Hamas? No, not really, but we got to get humanitarian aid. The people here are suffering and they need some help, and maybe it's worth it to, just maybe compromise and cut corners and hope none of this blows up in anyone's faces.
Yeah, and I was talking to James Valiant on a recent episode of the Daily Objective, maybe a couple days ago, about diplomacy, about how I mentioned how a few years ago somebody said to me as supposedly a negative thing, you're not very diplomatic. And I said, I take that as a compliment. Being diplomatic is being dishonest in a way. Now, that doesn't mean, you have to like always say immediately what's on your mind, but it does mean you don't, diplomacy requires, in a sense, at least the way it works in international relations. If you are a career diplomat, you are required not to exercise moral judgment, because you are required to work with those that, if you exercise moral judgment and apply objective morality to the people you deal with, you will no longer deal with them, because you will think, okay, this person is evil. This person is maybe only a diplomat, so he's only representing evil, but that makes him evil as well. Yeah, like you mentioned, Kirk, there are things about the people we're dealing with in international relations that you would think we wouldn't probably agree to do that within our countries. Although in some cases, I wonder, like in the U.S., there was the whole Chaz, was it called? The whole was that what the area that was taken
The City
over?
Hall Autonomous Zone, yeah,
Yeah.
in Seattle. City Hall Autonomous Zone, I think it was called, the Chaz for short.
Yeah, so that was gangsters taking over an area, and local government saying, okay, it's yours because you used force. And that's what we say in diplomacy to countries we agree to deal with. We'll agree to deal with you because you used force. Had you not used force, had Algeria's military dictatorship not been in existence, we would not deal with the thugs that run Algeria. So yeah, it is time to exercise moral judgment, not just on an individual level, but on an international level, when we decide who we deal with and how we deal with them, and who we take advice from on how to be, how to be rights respecting and rights protecting, as Israel has been lectured by, again, the worst countries about supposedly not being that. Marco.
Yeah, yeah, that's a problem. Even when you have Mickey Mouse countries like, Algeria, for example, because Algeria is effectively influenced, very much influenced by France. France is not pulling its weight and trying to rein them in a bit. I mean, the largest population outside of Algerians outside Algeria is actually in France. So there is a big ties. It was a former colony. They could have um, threatened them somehow, but you're not going to get a Western state, even France, uh, the worst of them, arguably, to put pressure on the people where they actually have some sort of clout, because it's going to be seen as imperialism. Because if the West tells some Mickey Mouse country in the middle of Africa, even if it's headed by a massive corrupt dictator like a good chunk of them, it's seen as the West imposing its will onto somebody who's less with less defense, somebody who's vulnerable to the West power. So automatically it's seen as an act of aggression. And as long as you continue with this worship of the weak, a worship of the inept, the inefficient, the corrupt, you're never going to win. And the only way in turning them back is starting changing the whole culture attached to it. But of course, the UN itself is a big corrupt organization. It's a place where, as I said, unaccountable bureaucrats get a job in order to shut them up. And if you are a corrupt official in, I don't know, in one of the African state, chances they are corrupt, even if they try to change something or they try to get in the way of China or Russia, they will be given some kind of big job with a big salary, or we put you in an office in New York. And are they going to say no? Of course, anyone would get any chance to escape Africa. But the point that most of the bureaucracy built in the UN is utterly designed to foster the interest of the dictator. It's a institutionalized corruption, really.
And all of this is not aided by the fact that, of course, the UN is also spectacularly boring to many people. So it exists in the background and isn't covered by lots of media most of the time, despite the evil it does. For example, I mean, the BBC, for example, is at the moment, it's focusing on Algeria. Yes, it's focusing on the fact that a female boxer from the Olympics with some gender questions is going to be suing Musk and J.K. Rowling for tweets that they did about her during the Olympics. That's the Algerian story you're going to find prominently displayed and discussed in British media, and you're not going to hear any of this kind of stuff unless you're searching really quite deep into newspapers and media coverage. And of course, all of that allows the creep of the UN to reach ever further unwitnessed and unchecked by the general person, who would be shocked at some of the things that are said in the name of the international community and are listened to and clapped and applauded, or even heard without storming out at virtually every single meeting that they hold.
And of course, Algeria is famous for its freedom of speech and gender equality. Homosexuality is illegal, so yeah.
But it's not punishable by death, right? Which makes it one of the better Arab countries, or is it?
Yeah, it's a riot, really. It's only 2 years in prison, if you come out alive.
Correct.
And why do Marco and Richard gotta keep referring to these pipsqueak dictatorships as Mickey Mouse countries? You know, when I think of Mickey Mouse, I think of like Disneyland and Disney World and happy places where you have fun and ride rides and everyone's smiling. So I don't think I want to associate that with these tin pot dictatorships who think they can use wonderful institutions like the United Nations to wag its finger at the rest of the world.
It's a fair point. It's a fair point.
Yeah, it's a good point. Although, Kirk, when you and I a couple of months ago were in the Disneyland area and we went to that dinner with everybody, Daniel and I almost got killed by one of those Disneyland trams, which is not exactly true, but we didn't see it coming. And when we kind of turned around, it looked like a missile was like we actually thought we were about to die. So in that case.
We are just reporting it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's better reporting than you get in most of the media. Also, Chandler says lettuce is good. What's weird is putting tomatoes on your burger. I don't want fruit on my hamburger. Thanks. First of all, everything about that statement is problematic. No, lettuce is not good. Second of all, yeah, I agree with you about fruit, except fruit that behaves like a vegetable. So tomatoes and avocados are fruits, but you want them on your burger. They make it better. You can thank me later. All right. Any yes, I know Daniel. Daniel, now I see why you and Chandler get along so well. You both hate tomatoes. Marco, Richard, where can people find more from you?
Yeah, first of all, just have a steak. Don't bother with the rest.
You don't need a bun even. You can find us on the Briefly Objective, which is in the link below for shorter content. And don't forget, it's got playlists now, so you can listen to chunks of them together and help boost our view time and help us get closer to that point when we can monetize. So for the benefit of this channel. So
And join the Substack.
yes, absolutely.
And Kirk, where can people find you?
My name, Kirk Wilcox, on Elon Musk's website at Kirk Wilcox, or you can find me here on YouTube. I have a whole catalog of YouTube videos where I talk about topics like the United Nations and Israel and a bunch of other fun stuff. So look me up.
And yeah, I will second the call to sign up to our Substack, which is another place where you can find Marco and in 3 days Richard as well. And yeah, once again, listen to Dr. Kenner's podcast. I think, especially after listening to our show, that can be particularly helpful. And I saw when we showed the ad that some people were annoyed by us showing the ad. We like what we do here at the Ayn Rand Center UK. We'd like to keep doing it. We'd like to do more of it. We'd like to do it better. It costs money. And so if you want to sponsor a show, get in touch with us. You will hopefully get eyes on your product or service. You will be helping us. And as a side bonus, you will be annoying some people. So everybody wins. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks, guys, for joining me. We'll be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show.
Bye-bye.